Welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng FYI with yours truly, a voter education program, but not just your usual voter education. We try to make this as entertaining but at the same time substantive as possible. Pag-usapan natin yung mga mahalagang issue na hinaharap ng ating bansa, not only in this election cycle, but for years to come. And for that, we are joined by the Dean and the Dean. Pwede tayo mag-coffee shop, no? Parang Dean and the Luca.
We'd love to do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dean, again for joining us. And thank you very much
Thank
also,
you,
Dean,
Richard.
for joining us. Yeah. Obviously, you guys, given your backgrounds and expertise and all, I don't want to do the usual punditry. I have nothing against punditry. We have fantastic episodes about anong mga latest na nangyari. But I want to zoom out a little bit. Una-una, I think we cannot understand really the Duterte phenomenon without understanding the grievance that brought Duterte to power. And that's really the grievance against Imperial Manila. I know that the other day may mga nainis sa akin kasi I said, you know, if you go to some parts of Mindanao, the HDI is Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm talking about like Nigeria level or whatever. And I said, if you go to my region, Cordillera, we're at the same level of almost Chile and Croatia, right? So the gap is huge. So it's very easy for someone from Mindanao to say, talaga pinabayaan tayo. Now, of course, we know there are war, there are structural reasons. But then, let me start with you. To what degree is the Duterte rhetoric about inaapi tayo ng Imperial Manila true? And to what degree is it a myth?
Well, I think the federalism argument kasi, in fact, predated Duterte.
Right.
He was one of the one of the early members of PDP Laban. But the federalism argument has been there long before he came into the bandwagon, no? So I think it was a timing
Pimentel.
Nene Pimentel, Bono Adas, and the whole gamot of the Mindanao Alliance. So it was a homegrown movement in Mindanao, and it was very logical for it to develop in Mindanao. Kasi nga, based on the issues that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
So it was sort of a timing on the part of Duterte maybe when he did his so-called listening tours and then came up with, his federalism agenda, which was somehow effective in 2016 because it helped him a lot in his presidential bid. Yeah, but to say that it was federalism was Duterte and Duterte was federalism that's missing the point. Kasi it's more than that,
but that's the problem, right? I mean, Duterte the other year openly said and say, Mindanao will separate and all. And I talked to, like, for instance, Congressman Zia, a couple of other leaders, and their concern is like, why is he talking as if, parang, it's like, l'état c'est moi, I am Mindanao, right? Essentially, l'état, Mindanao. Like, that personalization of this issue, to make it as if Duterte is equivalent to the entire Mindanao issue, it's quite presumptuous, if not problematic, right?
And also inaccurate.
Yeah.
And also inaccurate. Kasi nga, there were bigger names than Duterte, like as I mentioned, Nene Pimentel. And even in the academe, there were already a lot of researches that have been done. It gained a lot of ground in the 80s, when nobody else was talking about federalism, no? This was the early 80s. And Nene Pimentel was already involved in the drafting of the original constitution of PDP Laban. Nandun na yun,
Right.
And then Alex Brillantes and the other academics already wrote about federalism as early as the 80s. So, medyo sinuwerte siya in that sense kasi nga, he's from Mindanao and federalism and PDP also started from Mindanao.
Din, the current president run under a Federalista party, but the last thing he talks about is federalism. I remember very well during his first SONA, the big issue that Pastor Quiboloy had with him, and he went ranting on SMNI na bakit hindi pinag-usapan yung mga adhikayan ni Digong. At isa doon yung issue ng federalism. I remember also Robin Hood Padilla in a very colorful barong, right? Also expressing his discontent. So, why is Ferdinand Marcos Jr. not bothering to even revive that debate, or rather just discussion? Is it because the previous attempts were just so off the mark? Or is it because federalism really perhaps is not the best model for us from your understanding? I'll also get the view of other great Dean here, just to see the variety of views here.
Well, we have to understand when BBM decided to run to the presidency in 2022, right? No? So BBM is looking for a party that somehow will converge all possible forces. Not necessarily kasi the Marcoses are from Kilusang Bagong Lipunan, KBL. But on the other hand, you still try to get support from at least some so-called supporters of the Mindanao group, especially espousing for federalism. So I believe it's a tactical move on the part of BBM to adapt, what's called a zombie party. Sino ba yung PFP before? Hindi naman kilala. So,
I get it. Yeah.
Alam mo ang zombie at that time, so you have to make a Lazarus, no? To bring back their life again. At yun ang nangyari ng PFP. At mas maganda na pumili ka ng isang partido na necessarily well known, pero somehow it encapsulates some of agenda of your possible stakeholders. Like yung federalism, somehow it resonates pa rin naman sa Mindanao. Importante yan lalo na sa mga elders yung mga political elders and even yung mga intellectuals on that. No? That's why, ang nakakatawa lang dahil nga in reality, after winning the presidency and even in fact, organizing and expanding PFP, no? Mukhang walang masyadong discussion talaga on federalism. No? So,
but what happened under Digong? Kasi it's still shrouded in mystery. I remember very well. Our good friend Dean July was part of that. I don't know, commission.
Yeah, the commission.
Si Father from San Beda. They're good friends of mine.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, some of them are disowning the final product that came out. The Department of Finance. I remember Carl Chua back then saying this is not fiscally sustainable. There were conflicting assessments. Like for instance, the PIDS and CPAC, for instance, had a different assessment of what you can call menu costs in economics, right? Yung transition mo pa lang, bilyones yung cost, di ba? New institutions, new kind of software and hardware that you have to deal with. What is this? What went wrong with? Did it go off the rails? Like, to be honest, I don't think we have made the post-mortem, if I can say that word, of what happened with the constitutional
Nakita ko dyan, kasi for example, when the commission was organized on the latter part no? Of course,
towards the end na, yeah.
No? So in a sense, and of course, it's difficult to come up with the whole stat of it. So, yung timing itself, naging problemado na, try to enforce it, with so many issues, especially yung lumabas na yung mga study na who will be the regions that can only succeed if we move to, parang tatlo lang ata noon yung itong Iloilo, itong Calabar Zone, and Metro Manila.
Because they can raise their own fiscal resources.
But other than that, you will see. So, this is also a very important education for us, no? That if we will push for a policy agenda, dapat ready ka sa mga armaments. So, hindi po pwedeng manggaling ka sa, all policies, for example, that will set by the executive. Importante evidence-based talaga Ito complete study. Siguro kung lumabas yon prior on that, so hindi siya naging propaganda in a sense, no? Although we are not discounting the fact that federalism is indeed, a possible opportunity to really re-energize our Philippine government in a sense, no? But on the other hand, what is telling us based on the data, based on the research that's been made on that, may problema pa siya. So tingin ko yun din ang mga naging dahilan. Pangalawa, na nakita ko rin dyan, syempre, yung, I don't know kung maayos din talaga yung communication plan, how federalism was popularized and was disseminated. Medyo, kasi ang dami naman inisulot dyan kung tutusin. There are also many works being done, especially nga the Date Center of Pimentel, sila Mike Mastura, for a time. Pero
even Rolly Bendia wrote something about
pero hindi ko alam kasi kung yun ay nagamit, kung meron ba yung transition from past to present, no? So kung nagkaroon ba to ng clear nexus para gamitin mo. So eventually lumalabas din tuloy yung mga issues na teka, parang yung federalism before na clamor na it will help to develop Mindanao, eventually hindi pala kaya kasi the data that been provided to us is telling us differently.
Hindi siya encouraging, right?
At this point. So on the other hand, syempre, yung isang theory nga, yan yung role ng institutions and agency, debate ng institution and agency, that perhaps the people will try to reinvigorate that opportunity for federalism, but the institution is not ready for this. So yun nakita natin problema dyan.
I want to ask this din because the other debate also was it could be a Trojan horse. I mean, you had a very authoritarian, at least posturing president under Digong. Ilang beses sabi niya kailangan natin ng martial law across the country. Ilang beses niya sabi niya ng parang revolutionary government. So I think one problem they had was also the PR was bad. Like, is this really federalism or something else is going on here, right? But what is your post-mortem analysis from all these pre-existing attempts, which I think really reached its culmination, right? Oh, and not to mention, there was some attempt to change the constitution under the current Congress, except nagbanggaan sila ng Senado and eventually Zubiri lost his job partly because of that, some would say. Can we just look at this, yung longitudinal analysis, but most important, in the past 3-4 years, talaga nag-accelerate to eh. And then, poof, no one is talking about it.
A big part of it, I think, was also really communications. But if you look at the final proposal that was issued by that constitutional commission, it was completely, utterly different from what reached the House
Oh!
as a proposal.
Aha.
So dun pa lang, kaya the personalities that you mentioned earlier,
They had to distance.
they had to distance and they
Right.
were really, disappointed with that. So it parang
Are you
there's
referring to congressmen injecting their own items that favors them on term limits, blah, blah, blah?
completely different version
Ah,
at
it's a
all.
complete-
It's as though they
yeah.
did not even read the
Is this the
proposal in
Arroyo
first place.
version?
No. During the time of Duterte na.
Pantaleon Alvarez tong Congress.
Probably, yeah.
Sorry, because
yeah.
I remember there was like a one being pushed under Arroyo. One,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
those days very well.
But what is certain is that di sila nag-usap. It did
Yeah.
not it did not jibe with the proposal of the Constitutional Commission. So yun palang problematic. But I'm not giving up hope on federalism as a model, ha. Kasi nga I said, it transcends beyond any individual personality, even Duterte himself.
Yeah.
Kasi the issues are important eh. And ako naman, I'm also very pragmatic. If we cannot do federalism now, because the times may not be conducive to a shift to federalism, then let's do honest to goodness decentralization. Because there's also, siguro, si Dean Gary also mentioned this earlier, may konting problema dun sa acceptability ng federalism precisely because people don't understand it eh.
Yeah.
Hindi masyadong nagre-resonate. Pero yung decentralization, along with the Mandanas-Garcia ruling, mas swak yun eh. And I think, if you look at it as a logical, continuum, then let's do decentralization.
And what about
Something workable.
capacity building? Because I've looked at the studies, for instance, in terms of revenue generation. Basically, that's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of attack on Imperial Manila, but in terms of revenues, we're kind of subsidizing the rest of the nation, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because even the Davao region, they were not raising enough funds in terms of capacity, fiscal capacity, right?
Yeah, if you want to go by extremes nga eh, there are some LGUs where the IRA dependency is at 99%. That's true.
So basically, they only raise 1% of what, I mean, that's crazy.
I'm not blind to that, if you look at it at an LGU per LGU level. But my point is that has also been contemplated, at least in the original version of the CONCOM output. No, they talked about it's a asymmetric federalism, and it's something that they realized
I see.
earlier on. And I remember that the proposal of Nene Pimentel was to set up a fund for the purpose of helping out those who cannot cope with more
Fiscal
developed
transfers.
with more developed regions like NCR. So lahat 'yon pinag-isipan.
Okay, so that brings me we had a semi-experience with ARMM and an ongoing experience with BARM, right? The previous one was a disaster. The current one, we should make it work. So isn't the other argument is like, wait lang, we have an actual laboratory, and I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but we have an actual laboratory of experimentation with this, and maybe we want to get this first before talking about the bigger picture, right? I mean, what is your read on that? Because I'm not sure the ARMM one was very encouraging, and the BARM one is still a work in progress, to be honest about it.
Well, it's true that, the disastrous arm experiment, somehow, we learned a lot of lessons from that. That's why I remember it was during the time of Pinoy when BARM was really conceptualized. It just so happened that there are some personalities at the national level did not support the BARM, and somehow it's approved during the time of President Duterte. But if you look at the provisions of the BARM compared to the ARM, it's really progressive in a sense. Number one, the so-called system, the parliamentary system that they employ. They have the chief minister.
Yeah.
And then of course there's also party representative in BARM. No?
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah. So my proportional
there's
representation.
proportional representation in BARM.
Oh,
compared with for example, in other regional government.
Yeah.
So that's something. And of course, their share. It's very articulate on their share on generating the resources. No? And to some extent, it also, the biggest armed group in Mindanao, which is MILF, you've been asked to decommission. So yun yung mga magandang provision ng BARM. But of course, sabi ko nga, ang problema rin talaga ng BARM is that yung election that should happen, na-delay. Siyempre, tandaan natin, no? At the end of the day, whether we like it or not, sabi ko nga, yung consent is very important.
Yep.
No? So, people should elect the leadership.
Yeah.
No?
Legitimacy kasi
Precisely,
dito,
that's consent and legitimacy, they basically, they go together. So, yun ang nawala ngayon. That's why, yun ang nagiging concern, halimbawa, ng mga taong nakatala sa BARM. Including, for example, yung exclusion ng Sulu also in the BARM.
Yeah, that was also a blow.
It is also a blow because
Problematic.
I remember that, yeah.
Well, the Supreme Court ruled that Sulu did not, for example, affirm their inclusion, no, in the BARM. So they're out.
Yeah.
No? Kaya yun din yung mga nangyari. So katotohanan naman talaga, Sulu without BARM is not really a BARM. So kasi you will draw a map na you have the Zamboanga, Basilan, biglang
It's a truncated,
and then Tawi-Tawi.
medyo,
So this is something, different. So yun din siguro, baka kailangan din talaga ng restart nung BARM again, no? Hopefully number one talaga diyan magkaroon na ng election, no?
Yeah. And peacefully and all. And first, if there's one thing I'll give the Duterte administration, I was in Marawi just ahead of the midterm elections in 2019, and I was assured by people before and after na they had the most peaceful ever, elections, at least by historical standards, in terms of numbers of deaths, electoral-related violence, among other things. And I think steadily we have been building on the gains of the Aquino administration in terms of peace negotiations, the BARM referendum, and elections also during the Digong administration, and hopefully BBM will also get this right. So again, this is not a partisan issue. We all want Mindanao to succeed, especially yung mga kababayan natin who have, again, I completely agree with Duterte, have faced historical injustices.
I'd like to go back to what you said about
Please.
BARM, no? And it's, in fact, I don't see it as contrary to the federalism agenda. In fact, you can look at it, as you mentioned,
as a laboratory,
as a federalization pilot project,
pilot project,
if you will, no? And then learn from the lessons so that the next time we do it, if ever we do shift to a full federalism model, we'd learn from the experiences of BARM.
In theory, yes. Now, there's the other side of this coin. We can do all of the permutations here. But what about shifting to a parliamentary system? Because that's something that gained more traction recently, especially under the current leadership of the Congress. Medyo nagkaroon ng banggaan here and there. But I'll tell you what, on federalism, I'll be transparent. I'm a little bit more skeptical of federalism. I feel the gaps are just so big. I think it's going to reinforce warlordism in a lot of areas. So for me, there are a lot of unintended consequences I'm very worried about, despite all the good things we want to happen. But I'll be frank, the idea of a parliamentary politics whereby it's less personalistic, not perfectly, because we see even with Boris Johnson, right? I mean, he was not supposed to be a presidential candidate, but the way he ran his candidate was like a president. So I'm not romanticizing a parliamentary system. But should we also seriously discuss maybe parliamentary is the way forward? Because I'm not giving up on democracy, but I'm having a lot of hard time seeing how we can get a lot of important things through with this current setup we have of parang pabudots ang every elections, and it's always anti-system. Every 6 years, a president comes, Pinoy comes saying, lahat corrupt, ako ganyan. And then Digong coming, lahat niya, ako ganyan. And then Marcos saying, bahala kayong lahat, Marcos. But, like, I'm not very encouraged, to be honest, with the last 3 cycles of really wild, polarizing politics. And as we speak, I mean, my goodness, the Duterte situation, the Hague situation, I don't think... So, a part of me is feeling... Maybe we should warm up at least to a serious discussion of parliamentary democracy, right? Even if we know we're not going to get a Westminster or Canadian reality tomorrow. I'm very realistic. But do you think it's worth a shot, Dean?
Well, I'm always open to coming up with different permutations, as you said, no? Federal presidential, federal parliamentary, I'm not really ideologically opposed to it, no? And in the case of parliamentary government, I would locate it to for example, what I think is an equally important issue of party politics. No? Do we have the capacity to somehow make sense of
Pero yun nga, chicken or egg, diba?
That's right,
That's
right. So, I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm willing to give it a try. But, dyed in the wool federalista kasi ako, so I've long been advocating federalism.
I understand.
Yeah.
No, ang akin lang is, I remember your argument about, well, if this is your problem, then this is what we'll do. Ako naman for parliamentary, well, if your problem is party system, then siguraduhin mo, gawin mo yung hindi mo ginawa sa 1997 Constitution. For instance, I mean, we know in any real democracy, there are anti-defection laws, hindi pwede balimbingan, there are certain campaign financing rules, there are some really strict guardrails, constitutional guardrails, to encourage real political parties, which I feel is not there. Because I don't want to go down this culture argument, to be honest. I'm very allergic to culture argument because honestly, I go down to Mexico, I go to Argentina, I go to a lot of countries, I feel they're almost like Philippines. And yet, their party systems are far more developed than us. Their grassroots movements are far... So, feeling ko, hindi masyadong benta sa akin yung, ganyan talaga, ito, hindi mag-work sa... I just don't buy that. I think it goes against social science. The whole point of social science is not social engineering, but the idea of modernization, right? The idea of bringing a semblance of Weberian rationalization. I'm sure their postmodern friends will disagree with me, but good luck with running the country on postmodernism, right? I want to run it on it because otherwise climate change and AI are going to eat us alive in the coming years. Do you get where I'm coming, Dean? Like, I'm saying, what if parliamentary? Because in a separate episode, we have a discussion about PITA, the move forward, future forward in Thailand. I don't think they could have done it in a presidential system, right? They just had to win the most votes in competitive districts and then put together something. Yeah. Except Thailand is not a democracy, so sorry, it didn't turn out that well. And then France is a mixed dominant president with a parliament on march, etc. So practically every encouraging case I'm looking at is not like a Philippine-style system. And the US, which is really a role model, unfortunately, I would say, is not also in the best place, right? So again, you can disagree with my characterization. I'm just saying, for me, as someone who's very scared of a Trojan horse move, I'm warming up to the idea of a parliamentary change. Am I being just desperate? Am I being naive? What is your take, Dean?
Well, honestly, pakalabas ang edad ko dito, no? When
sorry,
because I would like to share my personal experience
please,
as well, no? Aside from our scholarly reading of this topic. For example, I was when party list law was enacted in 1998, I was one of the early advocates of party list. And for me, it's very hopeful. I'm very hopeful when, party list law will pave the way, the opportunity that strong party
marginalized groups,
number one, will counter the personality system. That's one. And then I remember that I speaking that in the streets, explaining the importance of party list system. And of course, I say this is the first time that we will be represented, not appointed, but we will get a mandate from the people. Kasi nga, the party list law itself, that marginalized, underprivileged. Very clear on that. No?
And look at what we did to the party list system.
That's what I'm going through. That after a while, you see it was hijacked by the elites.
Adulterated, yeah.
So to some extent, may kasalanan din dyan ng Supreme Court. Hindi ko nababanggitin kung sino yung mga nag-decide dyan, no? Mga critical issues on the explaining and interpreting that the party list law representative is not necessarily coming from the sector. So yan yung mga naging dilemma rin yan eh. But and to some extent, it somehow reflects na one, ang bigat sa atin ng personality politics. At saka hindi na personality politics eh. I would like to use Jenkins. Face politics. Di ba? Look at the party list law, kailangan may mukha na sila. Either
or yung mga artista na nag-endorse.
Na nag-endorse eh. Kasi nga, people cannot identify na like, it's really a party. Hindi. Yung mga top parties natin, may mga modelo yan eh. Di ba? To some extent eh. So, laging may litrato. So that's now the face politics that I'm bringing in the discussion where,
Can I push back against that? Okay. I heard a very interesting counterfactual argument. Sabi nila, if only the two-party system we had in the post-Commonwealth era, if only he had chance to grow on its own, we would not be maybe too far from where Taiwan and Korea and this other two parties. Kasi pinatay niyang martial law eh. And then we went back to essentially multi-party, no-party system, and next thing you know, it's all buduts and budul, right? So, again, that's what I'm saying. Well, when you say ganun tayo sa Philippines, but we had a two-party system before.
Yeah,
not perfect, but what if it had given a chance? Hindi kasi, yun nga, for me, that martial law period really truncated what could have been a growth of a real two-party systems. And we never really went back. You get what I'm saying? I'm coming from a very different angle now.
Ang problema ko kasi dyan sa two-party system, that's why I advocate for multi-party system.
Right.
It's very limiting. And in fact, sasabihin naman natin, yung election ay continue to be a playground of the elites. especially if we have two-party system, because it's very difficult, no, for a third party, for a fourth party to come in. That's why, I believe that, sabi nga nila, all flowers must be bloom, di ba?
Yeah.
Sabi nga nila to some extent. So, iba't ibang perspective.
Medyo Maoist yata. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Yeah.
So in a sense, no, so yan yung mga idea natin. But it also caters the idea that, different perspective somehow, it's also healthy for a healthy discussion. Rather than you limit to two-party system where this ruled by the elites, no? Simply put it.
Especially if you look at no fundamental difference between the two parties in the first place. Well, we could
Kasi personality pa rin naman eh.
Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between a liberal and a nationalista?
Yeah.
Even if you look at it as an academic undertaking, I wouldn't know the answer to that question. So it's all rooted to that.
So you're saying that the rot was at the heart of the apple. This is now depressing me, but on a less depressing note, so in absence of change either to parliamentary or federal, whatever permutation, how do we make the most of what we have? Realistically. Again, hindi ito grocery list. Realistically, all of us have been dealing with government officials, congressmen, senators, president, whatever. Realistically, with the trapo system we have, how can we tinker? If I can, I'm being very pragmatic about it. How can we tinker it to move it slightly in the right direction? Honestly, my perspective for me is that palakihan mo, let's just let the economy keep on growing the middle class. For me, while the middle class is getting bigger and bigger, why do you think I'm doing this podcast? If I did this podcast 10 years ago, there would be no market. Now I can see in my analytics, there are millions of Filipinos who actually have the leisure of sitting back, having their Starbucks, and listening to 1 hour to a horrible person like me. So apparently, we have a middle class. Which was not there 10 years ago. So a part of me, again, I know it sounds so modernization theory and inevitabilist, but I do believe that one good thing going for us is that if, God forbid, I thank God, tuloy-tuloy itong 6-7% growth natin, we'll have a solid 50 million strong middle class. Then maybe even vote buying could be fought back against. I mean, it's easier to fight against vote buying when, it's not 70% is below poverty line or something. And you also can have more room for this kind of discussions, demand for high-level discussion. So for me, but that's very structural long-term, no? Putting that aside, Deans, what do you think are the things we can do tinkering and tweaking in the meantime habang wala pang constitutional change?
Well, along the lines of empowering local governments, we already have the Mandanas Garcia ruling, no? Giving a lot more resources to LGUs. But the question is, as perhaps you may have suggested earlier, kaya ba? So it all goes back to that question of capacity.
Right.
And absorptive capacity is no joking matter.
Yes.
I will also not romanticize this because it's an issue. So the thing that we can do is, alongside the local government code, alongside the Mandanas Garcia ruling, is to do serious capacity building at the local government level. No? And not only BARM, kasi that's the classic example of the worst, but you have other regions like Samar and all that would really need a lot of help in that department.
Right. And you, what about Dean? With the existing status quo, what are the realistic tinkering and tweaking we can do short of some revolutionary movement or something? Because the reason I'm saying this is that you have people like Justice Scarpio, among others, openly warning, if the status quo continues, this kind of polarization and dissatisfaction, even if our middle class is getting better, our per capita is going higher, we're almost upper middle income, the temptation for something funny, Rev Gov A, martial law E, right, is gonna increase. Again, case in point, South Korea, I mean, per capita $40,000 established. Next thing you know, may martial law sila. I mean, it didn't work. But you get what I'm saying? Ayoko maging complacent.
Yeah.
I heard so many Filipinos telling me, I'll be honest, I was on the record. I was on the other side of Taft. I said, mananalo yan si Digong. I was panicking. I said, mananalo yan si Digong. On Tito Abunda's show, that's why love niya ako eh. I said in September pa lang of 2015, I said that guy's a dark horse. You know why? Because I watched the rise of other populists. Narendra Modi from Gujarat to I watched Jokowi.
Orban.
Orban, hindi ko pa kilala masyado nun. Actually, Orban, I only got to know him more when I realized how influential he is with American conservatives.
Yeah.
And then we have Cleve Arguelles, who did his master's in CEU, Central European. And then I went obsessed with Orban. But yung mga third world country na ganun, I was watching Erdogan. Si Erdogan, literally, when he ran for mayor of Istanbul, yung Turkish version is Atento. He's one of us. So wait lang, wala Atento pre, di ba? So, Kaya I was not surprised. I said, pwede mangyari yan eh. Di, ang Pilipino, ayaw bumoto sa mga matay tayo, mabait tayo. Yeah, mabait tayo, but you never know. So kaya ngayon, when I hear people saying, what about RevGov? And there were people in the military who openly, publicly criticized me for that. I said, go ahead, defend yourself. But ako, I just don't want to be complacent. And ang fear ko dito is, kung purong budots na naman mangyari, I mean, let's be honest, looking at the surveys, the next Senate will be even a worse circus. My goodness. And I'm not the one. I have fellow senators coming to me and saying, Richard, alam mo, nakakaya na nangyari, alam namin yan. Kung magkakaisa magalit sa akin, pati sila nahiya na, parang, grabe naman tong mga hearings namin. Yung iba, hindi na nagsasalita eh. Diba? And my sense, it will get worse. If the current surveys hold, oh my God, magla-live na akong podcast from Senate next Congress. Para ano na,
So,
may
tatapuan
circus.
na rin, gano'n ba?
Oh, mag-set up na kami. Parang may circus sa likod. Nag-away-away naman. Tawag nung isa, good morning, everyone. Dito pa tayo sa Senado natin this morning. I mean, and then yung isa, bibigyan ng jacket nung isa, itapon niya ng jacket dun sa... It's gonna be bad. And for me, I'm honest, I can see that people are gonna lose hope. This is a joke. This country is a joke. We had Lloyd Alois, our great friend, openly saying, I'm almost giving up hope on the Philippines, right? Maybe maybe emotional lang siya, whatever. Maybe she was just frustrated. I understand it. US is a mess too. But yun nga medyo I'm worried Baka medyo may mga malikot na isip. Kaya nga I'm saying, maybe we should seriously talk about some structural reforms even from within, right?
Well, ako magiging academic lang ako ng konti dyan.
Sorry, naging dramatic ako.
It's okay, kasi lahat naman tayo, given the wicked problems that we are facing right now, it requires some drastic solution. Pero ang tanong, syempre, sabi ko nga, at the end of the day, kailangan pa rin natin ng mandate, kailangan pa rin natin ng consent with the people. That's why, coming from the people, medyo babalikan ko lang yung nabasa ko dati si Archon Fong tsaka si Eric Olin-Wright. Yung empowered participatory governance, which I think one of the key important lessons that we really have to work with at the ground level. Sa mga tao, you have to really empowered and participate. Pero kasing participatory governance, sabi ni Archon Fong, hindi, pero dapat empowered sila.
Yeah.
Of course, alongside with that, syempre, yung ating panawagan pa rin for political reforms, no? Hindi pa rin tayo magsawa sana. At the end of the day, I mean, naalala ko yung sinabi ni Robert Putnam before, no? Making democracy work, na nawala yung kanyang disgusto sa mga political parties sa Italy. That's why nag-rely na siya ngayon sa mga social clubs as the bearer of democracy. No, sana wag naman ganon. Bumalik sana tayo dun sa isang sitwasyon wherein people will really embrace a particular organization, a particular party, no, that really embodied their interests, hindi yung personality-based. So, mahaba yan, mahabang proseso yan. No? Kaya pero sabi nga, may mga multi-lanes na kailangan tayong harapin. Even in international, role of the academe, no? Kaya nga, kami, halimbawa, ni Dean Ed, no? Very active kami sa pagtuturo, hindi lang sa loob ng aming mga university, ng aming mga colleges, kundi, no? Tuturuan din namin, halimbawa, yung mga LGU officials, no? Even yung some organizations as well, no? As part of our advocacy. Kasi, kailangan mong tahiin lahat yan So, at this juncture that we are facing with, as I mentioned earlier, yung mga wicked problems, no? Ano talaga it requires a major surgical operations, plus.
But with a scalpel.
Yeah.
With a scalpel, not with a hammer. Din Ed, what about you? You think we need more listening going around? Because this is not a voter education of let me educate you. And we're hoping to go across the country. Sa tingin niyo ba, tayo mga based dito sa Manila, or at least some of us, masyado kaming deracinated from the realities out there? Well-meaning, pero medyo malayo sa mga realidad on the ground.
So, ibig sabihin, if anything, what we can learn from the victory of individuals like Donald Trump is that we should get down from our high horse and really talk to the people, talk to the students.
And podcasters. I mean, he was talking to podcasters.
And you know what? We will learn a lot from them. I'm surprised. I've been teaching, as age goes, I've been teaching for almost 30 years already, and the kind of students I've had early on are different from the kind of students we have now, both good and bad. But the point is, we have to continue engaging the youth of today. And how do we do
on
that?
their terms.
Yeah, on their terms, using their language.
Exactly. TikTok.
Ganon. So, it's a continuing challenge, and we have to keep the conversation open between 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 us and the youth.
On that note, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Dean, for that fantastic intervention, and
Thank
also,
you.
Dean, for that. So apparently, ideologically ka pala into federalism. I mean, you said you're you said you're not, and then like, see, I caught you there. No, no. But kidding aside, thank you very much, guys, for joining us for this latest episode of FYI with yours truly. It's supposed to be voter education, but I realize we have to be more educated about the voters too, including listening to them and going across the country. So abangan yan for more episode in the coming weeks and months and hopefully years, kung saan kausapin po naman natin yung mga thought leaders, LGU leaders all across the country para mas maintindihan natin yung mga katotohanan and the realities on the ground, because that's the only way I think we can push the country in the best direction possible. Maraming salamat, God bless, and talk to you soon.